A summer rescue mission high in the mountains of Hokkaido was supposed to be routine, but what the helicopter crew found that day was anything but ordinary. As the chopper skimmed over the Daisetsuzan National Park on July 24th, 1989, searching for two missing hikers, the pilot spotted something astonishing on the ground below. It was giant white letters spelling out SOS in the middle of the green wilderness. The makeshift distress signal had been formed by birch tree trunks, each about 15 feet long, arranged to catch the eye of anyone flying overhead. The crew zeroed in and soon located the lost hikers, two men from Tokyo, a couple miles north of the mysterious sign. Relieved, the rescuers whisked the pair to safety, assuming the improvised SOS had been the handiwork of these very hikers. But as the helicopter team went over the site and congratulated them on their clever signal, the two men exchanged baffled looks. They hadn't made any sign at all. In that moment, a routine rescue transformed into the start of one of Japan's most perplexing wilderness mysteries. The revelation sent a chill through the Hokkaido authorities. If the enormous SOS wasn't made by the rescued hikers, then who had put it there? The search team suddenly realized there might be another stranded person out there. Someone who had painstakingly arranged 19 birch logs into a desperate plea for help and never lived to see rescue. Due to fading daylight on the 24th, authorities had to wait until the next morning to investigate the area around the sign. On July 25th, a second search party returned to the remote mountainside to scour for clues near the giant letters. The sign lay on a marshy slope about 2 miles from Mount Asahidake's summit, not far from the headwaters of the Chubetsu River. It wouldn't take long for them to discover that the silent symbol was indeed the harbinger of a tragedy. Scattered bones were soon found strewn near the wooden sign, confirming the team's worst fears. The skeletal remains had been disturbed by animals, with bite marks on many of the fragments. More eerily, investigators noted that some bones were broken in ways suggesting the person had suffered serious injuries before death, possibly from a fall in the treacherous terrain. As the search expanded, police made another grim find. A small hole or crevice in the ground, just large enough for a person to huddle inside, containing an abandoned backpack and assorted personal items. This hidden cache was like a time capsule from the past. Inside the pack were items that hinted at the identity and fate of the mystery victim. There were 2 cameras, a tripod, a notebook, a pair of men's basketball shoes, a couple of toothbrushes with toothpaste, and a portable tape recorder with 4 cassette tapes. Perhaps most crucially, there was also a driver's license. The name on the ID was Kenji Iwamura, a 25-year-old man from the city of Konan in Japan's Aichi Prefecture. The discovery of Kenji Iwamura's belongings brought a sense of clarity to the situation. Police now had a probable name for the deceased camper. Kenji had gone missing 5 years earlier, in the summer of 1984. Back on July 10th, 1984, Kenji, an office worker and avid outdoorsman, had set off alone on a hiking trip to Mount Asahidake, part of the same national park where the SOS sign now lay. He was reportedly taking a week off after a job promotion to explore the scenic Hokkaido wilderness. Before heading into the mountains, Kenji checked in at a local lodge near the trail. Staff later recalled warning him that the weather was turning foul and the route could be dangerous, advising him to wait for better conditions. But the young hiker was eager and undeterred. He departed for the climb despite the cautions, aiming to reach the summit against all odds. When Kenji failed to come back to the lodge or show up at work the next week, a missing person report was filed, and local police conducted searches in 1984. At the time, they found no trace of him in the vast expanse of forested peaks. Kenji Iwamura seemed to have vanished into thin air. Now, 5 years later in 1989, It appeared that his final message had literally been spelled out on the mountainside, tragically unnoticed for years. The giant SOS sign spotted by chance in the helicopter search had likely been built during Kenji's ill-fated excursion and stood as a silent witness to his plight. Indeed, when authorities consulted old aerial photographs of the area, they discovered that the huge SOS had been visible in images dating back to at least September 1987. For at least 2 years prior to its 1989 rediscovery, the sign, and possibly Kenji's remains, lay hidden in plain sight, undetected by other hikers or rangers. And yeah, you may have noticed I said possibly. This is where things start getting really weird. With Kenji's ID and gear now in hand, investigators initially assumed the recovered bones were his. However, this case was about to take another bewildering turn. The skeletal remains were sent to Asahikawa Medical University for analysis, and the first reports came back with a shocker. The bones appeared to belong to a woman, approximately 20 to 40 years old. Kenji was male, so this finding raised troubling questions. Did another person die alongside Kenji Iwamura? The media latched onto the idea that an unidentified woman had perished there, fueling wild theories. Yet there were no reports of a missing female hiker in the area, and everyone who knew Kenji insisted he had gone hiking alone. Faced with these perplexing findings, authorities turned their attention to the tapes recovered from Kenji's backpack. Perhaps they could shed light on what happened in those final moments on the mountain. On July 27, 1989, a police team played the 4 cassettes, not knowing what they would hear. 3 of the tapes contained nothing unusual. They were filled with music, notably theme songs from popular 1980s anime TV shows. It later came out that Kenji was something of an otaku and had carried those tapes with him on the hike. But it was the 4th tape that turned the investigation on its head. This cassette held a 2-minute and 17-second recording of a voice, a young man, shouting in panicked Japanese. In the crackling audio, he's yelling SOS and begging for help over and over. He frantically explains that he's stuck on top of a cliff and cannot move. The voice is strained, desperate, and echoing with the hopelessness of someone who truly believes these might be his last words. Hardened police officers listening to the tape were haunted by the sheer desperation in those recorded shouts. It was as if Kenji Iwamura had used the last of his strength to make an audio message in hopes that rescuers might find it. Yet, the method was puzzling. A tape recorder is not a transmitter, so why record a plea for help that no one would hear in time? One theory was that Kenji had intended to use the recording in lieu of his voice if searchers came near. He planned to use it if he grew too weak to shout, or maybe he did it just to leave it behind as a metaphorical message in a bottle. Another possibility is that he simply left the recorder running by accident, and it captured his final cries without him realizing. To this day, we don't know for sure. The only thing certain is that the tape preserved a chilling moment in time, a young man alone on a mountainside, calling out for salvation that would not arrive in time. Interestingly, when police played the tape for Kenji Iwamura's parents later on, the grieving family couldn't conclusively identify the voice as their son's. It's possible the agony and exhaustion had distorted his voice beyond recognition, or perhaps the voice might belong to someone else entirely. The tape's existence and the parents' doubt opened the door to yet more speculation. By early 1990, the case of the SOS sign had advanced somewhat, but many mysteries remained unsolved. After re-examining the bone fragments, authorities corrected their earlier mistake and concluded that all the remains belonged to one person. Further, despite the earlier confusion, that person was male, and in February 1990, the police formally announced that the skeleton was now believed to be Kenji Iwamura. Yet, if Kenji Iwamura died there in 1984, critical questions lingered. How had a lone, injured man built an SOS sign of such magnitude? And if he didn't build it alone, who helped him? The wooden letters on that slope were enormous. Each letter was roughly 10 to 16 feet across, composed of multiple heavy birch logs stacked 3 high. Analysis by forestry experts estimated it would take a strong, able-bodied person at least 2 days of hard labor to assemble such a sign with the available timber. Kenji, however, was described in the autopsy as having a slight, thin build, so much so that the authorities had initially very confidently misgendered his remains. Simply put, Kenji was no strapping Japanese woodsman by any stretch of the imagination. Further, the injuries to his skeleton suggest he had broken bones that would have left him weak or immobilized before he died. Building the huge SOS under those conditions would verge on the impossible, unless he had injured himself in the process of making the sign. Furthermore, no axe or saw was ever found at the site, while the logs could have been deadfall, already fallen trees. Arranging them so neatly likely required cutting tools, or at least tremendous effort to drag and position. So how then did the SOS sign come to be? One leading theory suggests that Kenji Iwamura may not have been completely alone during his ordeal. Perhaps he crossed paths with another lost hiker on the mountain. In this scenario, after Kenji fell and injured himself, explaining the fractures in his remains, the other person tried and failed to carry him out of the ravine. Kenji, unable to walk, might have urged this companion to go find help. Before leaving, the unknown helper could have gathered birch logs to create a massive signal nearby, hoping it would lead rescuers to Kenji. The theory continues that the companion then set off to seek rescue but never made it, perhaps falling victim to the elements as well, or turning back after getting lost. If this hypothetical Good Samaritan perished or failed to inform authorities, it would explain why no one ever came for Kenji. The Hokkaido police themselves considered this two-person theory as a strong possibility. It neatly accounts for the scale of the sign and the absence of a cutting tool. A healthier, strapping Kintaro type of fella could have done the heavy lifting and chopping. It also might explain why Kenji's family didn't recognize the voice on the tape. Conceivably, it could have been the other man's voice on the recording. However, this theory has one glaring hole. No evidence of a second person was ever found. No extra set of belongings, no second skeleton, no additional names in lodge logs or missing persons reports. Despite being plausible, it remains purely speculative. On the other hand, perhaps the simplest explanation is closer to the truth. Kenji Iwamura may have been more resourceful and determined than anyone guessed. Despite his injuries, maybe he did manage to slowly drag and stack logs into an SOS sign over many agonizing days, driven by sheer will to survive. Human beings in life or death situations have accomplished incredible feats of endurance and strength. In this version, everything at the site was essentially his doing, a solo struggle against nature with a tragic ending. Officially, the case was closed with the conclusion that Kenji was alone and died due to an accident in the wilderness. Yet even the police admitted that some aspects would forever remain unanswered. And remember how this story started out? Well, in a bittersweet twist of fate, his SOS sign did save lives, just not his own. 5 years after Kenji disappeared, that weathered SOS ended up leading rescuers to 2 lost hikers, bringing them home safely. This final act of desperation thus became an unintended beacon of hope for others. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with my usual reminder about clicking the like button and subscribing. Also, don't forget to check out my podcast, Lazy Chill True Crime, by clicking the links below or searching it up wherever you listen. I've got content on there from 2 of my channels, plus some bonus stuff you won't hear anywhere else. Late one September night in 1903, the quiet farming community of Van Meter, Iowa lay dark and silent. Without warning, that silence was shattered by a bizarre disturbance. While walking home after midnight, local businessman U.G. Griffith noticed a strange light bobbing atop a downtown building. As he approached, the light vanished, and he initially suspected a prankster with a lantern, but the light's uncanny movements quickly defied that explanation. Moments later, it reappeared on another rooftop entirely, darting far too swiftly for any human. The next night, around 1 a.m., Dr. Fred Alcott was jarred awake by a blinding beam shining through his window. Grabbing his gun, he rushed into the street and came face to face with an unimaginable sight. Also, by the way, if you're into people just wildly blasting at unidentified creatures, this is absolutely the story for you. But let's get back to the tale of the Van Meter visitor. The good doctor saw a towering humanoid figure, at least 8 or 9 feet tall, with enormous bat-like wings. A blunt horn protruded from its forehead, and from that horn a brilliant light shone, as if a living searchlight were attached to the creature's head. In a panic, Alcott fired 5 shots at the monster, despite it posing no apparent threat, but the bullets had no effect. The winged being simply turned and glided off into the darkness, leaving the stunned doctor trembling in the silent street. By the following day, news of the winged visitor spread, and fear took hold of the town. On the 3rd night of sightings, bank cashier Clarence Dunn kept watch at his workplace, determined to confront whatever was lurking in the dark. In the dead of night, a bright light suddenly flooded through the bank's window. The creature was outside. Dunn grabbed a shotgun and fired through the glass, sending the intruder flapping away into the shadows. In the morning, townsfolk found huge 3-toed footprints in the mud near the bank's door, nothing like tracks of any known animal. Excited and alarmed, Dunn cast one of the prints in plaster as proof of the encounter. Not long after, a hardware merchant named Orville White had his own chilling run-in with this animal, and you best believe Orville was strapped and ready for battle. Awakening to strange sounds, he stepped outside with a rifle at the ready and a revolver as backup and saw the beast perched atop a telephone pole, its forehead light cutting through the darkness. White took aim and shot at the creature, as was the style at the time. Yet again it shrugged off the attack, and this time it unleashed a repulsive, overpowering odor like rotting flesh. The smell hit White like a physical force, knocking him unconscious where he stood. From then on, reports consistently noted a terrible stench accompanying the creature wherever it went. The once skeptical townspeople were now convinced something real and dangerous was stalking their streets. According to one newspaper, all of Van Meter's men, women, and children were in a state of terror. By nightfall, the town fell silent as residents locked themselves indoors, desperately hoping to avoid the glowing horn and sweeping wings of the visitor. Notably, the eyewitnesses, a doctor, a banker, and a businessman, were all respected citizens, not known for telling tall tales. Their testimony forced skeptics to take the reports seriously. After nearly a week of nightly horrors, the townsfolk decided to take action. A group of armed men, many of whom may have been shaggy and/or violent, formed a posse to hunt down the mysterious creature once and for all. They noticed the beast always seemed to appear from the direction of the old abandoned coal mine on the edge of town. The posse suspected that the mine might be its lair, and theorized that perhaps the creature had been disturbed by mining operations. They knew what they had to do next. The men were going to prepare for the most epic boss fight of their lives. The posse set up an ambush at the mine's entrance in the pre-dawn hours of October 3rd. They huddled in the cool pre-dawn darkness, nerves on edge as every rustle of wind made their trigger fingers twitch. The monster suddenly emerged from the mine shaft, and right behind it came a second, smaller but similar creature. The men opened fire immediately, emptying their weapons into the two figures. But just like before, bullets didn't bring them down. The creatures only let out unearthly screeches and retreated into the mine's depths, vanishing for good into the darkness underground. Not willing to let them escape, the posse hastily barricaded the mine entrance with boards and rocks, determined to imprison the beasts below forever. After that fateful morning, the Van Meter visitor and its companion were never seen again. What remained were frightened but relieved townspeople, and an incredible story that would be retold for generations. In the aftermath, people struggled to classify what the Van Meter visitor could have been. The bizarre description, part human, part bat, with a luminous horn, invited comparisons to other legendary creatures. Contemporary accounts pulled from local Native American legends of the region that also speak of giant supernatural birds. Thunderbirds that could shoot lightning from their eyes or beaks were well known in the area even by that time, with sightings being somewhat common. The notion of a huge winged being emitting blinding light resonated with those ancient tales, leading some to wonder if the story of the Van Meter visitor was the legendary creature. A few more imaginative souls even mused that perhaps it had been a gargoyle come to life. Later cryptid enthusiasts drew upon the broader lore about these creatures. Some noted similarities to the Jersey Devil, a famed New Jersey cryptid described as a winged, horned creature, suggesting that it may have moved west along the frontier. Others likened it to something like West Virginia's Mothman, another mysterious flying humanoid known for glowing eyes and haunting appearances. Researchers and skeptics offered more grounded theories to explain the Van Meter mystery. One possibility was a case of mistaken identity, that ordinary animals had been misperceived under extraordinary conditions. Also, for anyone who's been with my channel since the beginning, almost 2 years ago now, you can already predict what I'm going to say next. A large great horned owl might loom frighteningly in dim light, and their features could be distorted by fear. For example, an owl's glowing eyes or a heron's silhouette might convince a startled witness they'd seen a monster with a shining horn. The plaster cast of the three-toed footprints could even have been an unusual bird track, interpreted as something monstrous by imaginative locals. So yeah, it could have been a standard owl misidentification, a theory I personally have about a lot of otherworldly encounters. In addition, some historians have suggested the incident was an elaborate hoax or mass panic. Early 20th century newspapers were known for publishing sensational wild monster tales, and it's possible a prankster in Van Meter sparked a chain reaction of hysteria. Once a few terrified reports came out, others might have subconsciously exaggerated their own encounters. Fear can be infectious, and a collective fright might have led the townspeople to literally shoot at shadows, convincing themselves a fantastic creature was afoot. Of course, there are those who maintain that something truly unexplained visited Van Meter. More paranormal theories propose that the creature was not a misidentified bird or a hoax at all, but perhaps a cryptid or supernatural entity. Some paranormal enthusiasts think the visitor might have been a prehistoric survivor, maybe a living pterosaur that found refuge in the caves. This would explain its leathery wings and horned reptilian appearance. Others go even further with this theory, hinting it could have been a literal interdimensional pterosaur that slipped through a portal from a dinosaur realm. That, they argue, might clarify why bullets had no effect. Perhaps the creature wasn't fully here in our physical reality. And yeah, just as a quick aside, the partially manifesting interdimensional pterosaur theory of the Van Meter visitor mystery should be in a textbook explaining why Occam's razor is a thing. Today, the Van Meter visitor story lives on as a proud piece of local lore and a fascination for cryptozoologists. Much like many localized cryptids, the Van Meter visitor was given its own festival in the town in 2013. No single explanation, natural or supernatural, has ever definitively laid the legend to rest. And over a century later, we're still left to question what visited Van Meter in 1903. Okay, so just as I'm finishing up editing on this video, I gotta toss in some additional commentary since the potential absurdity of this story hit me hard. If the Van Meter visitor was nothing more than an owl, then what unfolded in that small Iowa town was darkly comedic. Picture it, a terrified posse of armed, respectable townsmen marching into the woods, guns loaded, hearts pounding, lanterns swinging wildly. They approach the mine not to battle an interdimensional creature, not to confront a prehistoric survivor, but to flush out two confused owls that had roosted in peace. When the winged figures emerged, likely blinking in the light and flapping awkwardly, this insane posse of clowns fired a couple of volley of bullets at the poor birds. They missed, so I guess perhaps you could say they couldn't hit the broadside of a barn owl. And when the birds flapped back into the mine, probably just trying to get away from the noise, the posse declared victory by sealing some owls in a dark shaft. So yeah, the whole thing seems more like a darkly comedic episode of The Twilight Zone from that perspective, where the real monster is fear or something like that. It began with a pounding on the walls one night. In early April 1921, the Bowen family's small cottage in Guyra, New South Wales, was suddenly under siege by an unseen assailant. Night after night, tremendous thumps rattled the walls, followed by showers of stones clattering onto the roof. Window after window shattered until nearly every pane of glass lay in shards. Nobody managed to catch sight of who, or what, was hurling the rocks, but the attacks seemed especially directed at 12-year-old Minnie Bowen. Stones smashed through Minnie's bedroom window with eerie precision, often landing right on her bed. The frightened family and their neighbors began to whisper that a spirit might be responsible. So began the legend of the Guyra ghost, a mystery that gripped the nation and still haunts Australian folklore. As the bizarre bombardment continued, the once quiet community of Guyra plunged into panic. Suspecting either a ghost or a crafty prowler, dozens of residents had witnessed the phantom stone throwing at the Bowen home and were on edge. Night after night, volunteer watch parties gathered, sometimes as many as 80 people, forming a human wall around the cottage. Their presence did seem to halt the rain of stones on evenings when the crowd stood guard. But to everyone's alarm, the thumping on the walls continued unabated. To those listening outside, the booming knocks sounded as if they came from within the house. To the Bowen family huddled indoors, the bangs seemed to originate just outside the walls. The blows were so powerful they nearly shook the house to its foundations. Fear and tension in Guyra escalated to a dangerous pitch, and most people believed this whole incident was caused by something even more sinister than a poltergeist. Many people began sleeping with loaded guns at the ready to blast any quote-unquote ghost back to the shadow realm, so to speak. This jittery vigilance led to a horrific tragedy. One night, a local woman kept a six-shooter under her pillow for protection, only for her young son to find it and accidentally shoot his sister, though luckily, the girl survived. Even the authorities were feeling the strain. The local police sergeant sat up night after night at the house, sitting amid the incessant disturbances. After days of fruitless stakeouts and sleepless stress, the sergeant finally snapped. He was sent away on leave, exhausted and convinced that something supernatural was at work. In response to the turmoil, the state government dispatched a team of detectives from Sydney to take over the case. The detectives maintained constant guard on the Bowen abode and continued coordinating the volunteer patrols. They even set up powerful floodlights to illuminate the area in hopes of catching the perpetrator. Yet even under these watchful conditions, the ghost, whatever it actually was, refused to be caught. On one occasion, with the yard brightly lit, 2 large stones struck a wall of the home right beside a policeman, yet no thrower was in sight. The mysterious siege of the Bowen home proved impossible to stop, and by mid-April the story had attracted international attention in the press. Reporters flocked to Guyra, and among the outsiders who arrived was H.J. Moores, an American businessman and friend of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, interested in psychic phenomena. Moores came equipped with cameras and traps, determined to sleuth out a rational explanation, or even better, find proof of a real poltergeist. He was given free rein to investigate the Bowen house. He even removed sections of the roof to create hidden lookout posts in the attic. But the resilient Guyra ghost outsmarted every trap. Pebbles and walnut-sized rocks continued to pepper the walls, and Moores couldn't tell if the projectiles were being thrown from outside or from within the house. After days of fruitless surveillance, Moores conceded that no human prankster was evident, and poltergeist activity was the only explanation he had left. With conventional methods failing, some turned to a spiritual approach. In mid-April, the Bowens invited a psychic, Ben Davy, to see if he could calm the unseen forces. Davy learned that Minnie had an older half-sister, May, who had died just 3 months before the disturbances began. Suspecting a connection, he gently urged Minnie to speak to the presence. Late one night, with Minnie's distraught mother and several officials looking on, Davy prompted the girl to ask the unseen knocker if it was her sister May. To everyone's astonishment, Minnie's timid question was answered by a loud knock from the darkness. Heartened, she continued the one-sided conversation. Before long, Minnie was in tears, claiming she heard May's voice. She related that her sister's spirit was happy in the afterlife, thanked their mother for her prayers, and promised to watch over the family. Strangely enough, after Minnie's emotional attempt to communicate with May, the nocturnal attacks ceased entirely, but only for a short time. For several days, the Bowen household enjoyed quiet, but just as they started to believe the nightmare was over, the phenomena started up again with renewed fury. In late April, as a last resort, Minnie was sent away to live with her grandmother in the town of Glen Innes, about 25 miles from Guyra. If Minnie was truly the focus of the mysterious force, the family hoped, removing her from Guyra would end the haunting. That theory backfired. The poltergeist followed Minnie to her grandmother's house. Almost as soon as she arrived in Glen Innes, the same telltale knocks and stone throwing began plaguing that household. A local police officer who stayed on guard there reported hearing stones pelting the roof and walls while he watched, yet seeing nothing but an empty yard outside. Inside, heavy thuds struck with incredible force. Wherever the hapless girl went, it seemed, the chaotic ghost went with her. After about a week in Glen Innes, Minnie returned home to Guyra. Gradually, the disturbances faded away in the weeks that followed. By early June, the strange siege of the Bowen homestead had ended. In the aftermath, the people of Guyra breathed a sigh of relief, but they were left scratching their heads. Many residents were eager to put the bizarre episode behind them. In later years, Locals often downplayed the story or offered far-fetched rationalizations. One local claim was that the stones had all been fired by a giant slingshot from a far-off hill, a theory that never fit the facts but allowed skeptics to laugh the whole thing off. Sometimes the quote-unquote rational theory can make the supernatural theories look totally normal and commonplace, I suppose. Meanwhile, the police were also keen to close the book on the Gyra affair. Under pressure from detectives, Minnie Bowen confessed that on a few occasions she had tossed small stones onto the roof and tapped on a wall to scare a relative. However, she denied responsibility for the vast majority of incidents, and her family never wavered in asserting her innocence. No accomplice was ever identified, and if a real human trickster had been terrorizing the Bowens, that person was never caught. The police declared the mystery solved as a hoax, but plenty of people remained unconvinced. Paranormal researchers, unsurprisingly, had a different view. They noted that the events bore all the classic hallmarks of a poltergeist, a noisy spirit known for tossing objects about and banging walls, typically centered around an adolescent. In their eyes, young Minnie fit the profile of a classic poltergeist focus, a girl on the cusp of puberty unwittingly acting as the catalyst for the chaos. One investigator who studied the case concluded that the Gyra haunting was likely real, with Minnie herself the unwitting source of strange events. The incident's notoriety even inspired a silent film that same year, The Gyra Ghost Mystery, which actually featured Minnie and the rest of the family playing themselves. Weirdly, this film wasn't an early example of the horror genre as you might expect. We don't know exactly what was in the film, since all that survives is the script and some promotional material, but it was actually a comedy, or billed as such at least. This has led some to speculate that the entire family was in on the charade and had done it to gain notoriety and perhaps cash out, while the cashing out was good. Also, just as a quick aside, the brilliant paranormal investigator in the Gyra Ghost Mystery is named Sherlock Doyle. Now, I'm sure I don't have to spell it out for you guys, but Sherlock Holmes was created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Personally, Sherlock Doyle sounds like someone who would hunt down Arsène Lupin, the gentleman thief, on days when Herlock Sholmes is on vacation. Anyway, putting that aside, if the plan was to parlay a poltergeist hoax into silver screen fame, this didn't work out so well for the Bowen family. The movie was seen by almost no one at the time, and as I mentioned, it was subsequently lost and forgotten. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy stands as a cornerstone in Western esoteric literature. Published in 1533, this comprehensive work delves into the realms of natural magic, astrology, and divine mysteries, reflecting the Renaissance's fervent quest to harmonize science with mysticism. Agrippa, a German polymath born in 1486, was deeply immersed in the intellectual currents of his time. His engagement with Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and Neoplatonism is evident throughout his writings. The 3 books of occult philosophy emerged during a period when Europe was experiencing a resurgence of interest in ancient wisdom and esoteric traditions. This era, marked by the Renaissance, saw scholars striving to reconcile classical knowledge with contemporary thought. The treatise is divided into 3 distinct books, each addressing different facets of what was then defined as occult philosophy. The first book explores the natural world, emphasizing the hidden properties of elements, plants, animals, and minerals. Agrippa discusses how these natural objects possess inherent virtues that can be harnessed through proper understanding and application. He delves into the 4 elements, earth, water, air, and fire, and their corresponding qualities, asserting that a deep comprehension of these elements is essential for practicing natural magic. The second book transitions to the influence of celestial bodies on the terrestrial realm. Agrippa examines the astrological correspondences between planets, stars, and earthly events. He elaborates on how the positions and movements of celestial bodies can affect human affairs, weather patterns, and natural phenomena. This section underscores the belief that the macrocosm, the universe, and the microcosm, the individual, are interconnected. The third book delves into the realm of ceremonial or ritual magic. Agrippa provides insights into the invocation of spirits, the use of talismans, and the performance of rituals to achieve specific outcomes. He emphasizes the importance of purity, intention, and adherence to specific protocols when engaging in such practices. This book reflects the synthesis of various esoteric traditions, including Kabbalistic and Hermetic teachings. The work's integration of various esoteric disciplines provided a framework that many later practitioners built upon. Despite its acclaim, Agrippa's work was not without controversy. The Catholic Church, wary of the potential heretical implications of such esoteric writings, scrutinized and often condemned works on magic and the occult. Agrippa himself faced criticism and suspicion, leading to periods of hardship and persecution. His writings were included in the Church's Index of Forbidden Books, reflecting the tension between emerging Renaissance humanism and established religious orthodoxy. However, he was ultimately able to continue his work and be held in high esteem because he didn't hold himself out as an occultist, but rather someone who was just documenting phenomenon.